Hey everyone, Cleo here and welcome to my channel, and today I'm going through the books that I read in October. Now in October I had the biggest page count of the year so far, so I read like almost 2,800 pages, which is quite a lot for me, and it looks like I'm going the same route in November because I've put like 3 over 700 page books on my November TBR. But so for October I first started out by finishing a book that I had started and mostly read in September, but I still had some 150 pages to go for it in October, and that is A Short History of Nearly Everything by Bryson. This was basically my evening book, so when I went to bed I would always like finish with one chapter of this book. Like A Short History of Nearly Everything, as the title is saying, it is a short history of nearly everything. So it's trying to give you a comprehensive look at what we know about our world, about the creatures in it, about ourselves, and and while doing this also giving explanations of how did we get to this information, how was this discovered. As it is a comprehensive look, of course it's not going to go into details at all. It's like a 600-page book, so if you want to give some information about everything in the world, then that's definitely going to be very like surface level. But I think that is very interesting for those who want to have like a very comprehensive look at things, but also in order for you to discover which are the things that interest you most, which are the things that you might want to get a in-depth look at. For me this was definitely mostly the geography related chapters, so I very much am fascinated by earthquakes, volcanoes, tornadoes, anything weather related and stuff like that, and so those chapters really interested me. What I figured out to be not that interesting for me is chapters on how man became who he is today. The development, the evolution of mankind was that. Apparently I don't like that. I'm not that interested in that. That was really a struggle of a chapter to get through for me. But so for those of you who don't know Bill Bryson is an American. He lived for a very long time in the UK as well, and he writes non-fiction solely. Mostly what he writes is like travel stories. He mostly goes to places and writes about his experiences there, but he has some different books as well. He has a book on the difference between American English and British English. He has this one, of course, and his latest book is a book about our body and the functions of it, I guess, and things like that. And he has a very nice sense of humor. So all of his books are imbued with his sense of humor, and also in A Short History of Nearly Everything this is definitely the case, and it's a very nice counterpoint to what could have been dry facts. You're never like, except for that mankind thing that I wasn't interested in, like it's not a chore to get through this book or anything like that. It's not like you're chuckling all the way through neither, but there's just like this nice balance between facts and humor that he arrives at in this book. Next up, I finished 2 books around the same time, so like a week before the end of October. Yes, October. And first one of these is Nickleby by Charles Dickens. Now this is my 8th Dickens, so I've read quite a few at this point, and maybe I should take a break because everything is starting to get a bit too familiar for me, I guess. It's starting to get a little bit too much like I'm reading the same characters over and over again. That being said, it's not like I was bored with it or anything like that, but I just feel like, yeah, I want to step away from it a little bit so that I can get into it with like fresh amazement or something like that. Now Nickleby is one of his lesser known books. I mean, I didn't know what this was about at all. I had heard the title, but that was everything. And it's actually, like, I really enjoyed this one. I thought it's one of the books of Charles Dickens that I've enjoyed the most. But I did also, maybe because this is my 8th Charles Dickens, feel very much that it was being dragged on for a little bit too long. So this is a 700-page book. It could have easily been a 400-page book and could have still delivered quite as good as it did now. Of course, this is due to the fact that Charles Dickens, he wrote in periodicals, and so he was paid by the word, I think, or maybe by the page, but I guess by the word more like it. So he had a good reason to draw out his narrative, and of course also for his original readers, they were reading his works like throughout period of time, you know, they would have a new installment every, I don't know, week or whatever. And so for them it's very different, you know, they would talk about it amongst themselves, anticipating the next chapter and things like that. So I guess they would never read it in one big chunk, which means that it's easy, it's less striking for the audience of his time that it's like drawn out or anything like that. So in that sense, we as modern readers are going to have a totally different experience with it than they did. I have read somebody, I have seen somebody who tried to read it the way that they did in the Victorian times, but she didn't enjoy it that much, and I can understand that in our modern day we wouldn't enjoy it that much, you know, if you have to wait for it that long all of the time, then you're forgetting things, you're forgetting the characters and stuff like that. But I'm pretty confident in the fact that probably in Charles Dickens' time everybody was reading it, and so everybody was talking about it, and it was very much alive with the people, so they wouldn't be forgetting about these characters or something like that. It would also be like a joint experience. It would be like talking about Game of Thrones every single time that an episode came out and things like that. So I think we'll probably have a different feeling about these books than the original readers did. But so as a modern reader, it is a bit drawn out. So Nicholas Nickleby is about Nicholas Nickleby, who has just lost his father, and he, his mother and his sister are going to London to ask for aid from their uncle Rafe, who is very wealthy. But their uncle Rafe is very much like Scrooge from The Christmas Carol. It's a very grumpy guy, very much money, very much with a economic mind, very much centered on gaining as much money as possible. It's never enough, you know, he can never have enough money, and so he's very reluctant to see his money go as well. And so upon first meeting Nicholas Nickleby, Rafe develops this sort of big animosity towards him, and he will try his best throughout the book to make Nicholas's life a misery. And so throughout this book we are following plot development after plot development. There are plots being made against Nicholas, Nicholas thwarting these plots, and a lot of different side characters as well. This is a typical Dickens. It's inhabited by a lot of stereotypical characters from most of his novels. There's like so as I said, the self-involved money character like Scrooge. Then you have the schoolmaster who does everything to make the life of his pupils a misery. You have the self-involved mother who acts like she's the only one who cares about other people, while she's constantly actually just talking about herself, and a lot of these different characters. So it's a very fun ride. I would definitely recommend the audiobook, because the audiobook brings the humor out a lot more, I think. I mean, I think you could easily make this a little bit more dry if you read it yourself, maybe getting a little bit impatient with the text as well, with the length of it. But so when listening to the audiobook, this definitely comes across very well. I will say that there's a big volume difference between certain characters. So Nicholas Nickleby will be like at the same volume as the narrator, but some of the more coarser characters, the volume of the audiobook gets really loud. I was sometimes looking at the bus like, is somebody hearing this? No, okay, luckily. Now, what I also always like about Charles Dickens is that he has characters from different classes, and this is also the case here, and so I find it very enjoyable. And I actually read this book to join in with Victober. It's a readathon that takes place every October, and apart from this one I also read 2 other books for it. So the 2 other books that I read were the group reads for Victober. I will link the Victober announcement down below, by the way, in case you're interested to join next year. And the group books were 2 books by Oscar Wilde, A Woman of No Importance and The Importance of Being Earnest. So 2 plays. So these were nice short stuff to read after the 2 chunky books that I also read. So as The Importance of Being Earnest and A Woman of No Importance are plays, I'm not going to say too much about them, because like the audiobooks of both of these are under 2 hours, so there's not a lot of, if I give anything about the plot away, I'm almost giving everything away. But so they're very nice stories about the aristocracy in the Victorian times, and it's very much imbued with humor. There's a very lovely sense of humor throughout, and so it's very much looking at like the typical aristocracy. So in The Importance of Earnest, for example, we are very much dealing with two aristocratic gentlemen who basically have too much time on their hands, and so one of them is about to get married, but his fiance is very much she's very much adamant about wanting to marry somebody who's called Ernest, and he has pretended to be called Ernest throughout his time in London, but actually he is not called Ernest. And so from there the comedic schemes ensue. So one of his friends, for example, pretends to be Ernest as well, and you get this whole sort of mix of identity and things like that, with a very nice twist at the end. And then in A Woman of No Importance, we're very much looking again at the aristocracy, but in this case we are looking very much at a clash of cultures. So there's one American amongst the party, and all of the rest are aristocratic, English aristocracy. And so there's very much a difference between the sort of emphasis that the English gentry has towards leisure and not exerting themselves at any time, you know, never doing physical labor or something like that, and the American way of seeing that, they're very much more go-getters, you know, they make their own place in the world, they deserve their own place in the world, and they're very much more involved in that community service and things like that, and it's very much looking at that sort of clash of ideals with the background of a secret that's being discovered throughout this short play. Now both of these I absolutely loved, I absolutely recommend them. I definitely think you should check out the audiobook because as it is a play, it is very much intended to be viewed. Actually, I would really love to go see one of these plays. But as an audiobook you already get some of this experience as well. Especially for A Woman of No Importance, this was clearly a rendering of an actual play, and so it felt very, it was very well, it flowed very easily, it flowed very well, the humor, the comedic timing was on point and things like that, so I really enjoyed that one a whole lot. And then the final book that I read this month is the biggest chunk, and that is The Way of Kings by Sanderson. So I participated in a read-along. I will link it down below by Elle. That is why these were the weekly goals, and then I split them into daily goals. But I didn't have to keep to the weekly goals forever. I tried to keep to them as much as possible because most people were reading at that pace, and we had a discussion group. That's my breakfast. So I mostly tried to stick to the daily goals or the weekly goals, especially because we were discussing this on Caravan with a whole bunch of people, and it was just very nice to all be reading at more or less the same pace. This is my first buddy read, and to be able to discuss what we were reading as we were going along. And so I'm already behind on the November book because some people started earlier. They started at the end of October, and this is the 3rd of November and I still haven't started. So I'm gonna have to catch up because I really like the experience of being able to read alongside with all of these people. Now, The Way of Kings is difficult to describe. It's part of an epic fantasy series by Sanderson. So most of you might know him from the Mistborn trilogy, and this is his new series. It's very much considered to probably become his masterpiece. It's supposed to become a 10-part series. There are 3 parts out at this point. At the end of 2020, the 4th book is going to come out. And so The Way of Kings is the first book in this series, and each book kind of focuses on one character, and this one focuses on the character of Kaladin. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the world and things like that because it's quite difficult to explain. I will link a video down below that talks about the mythology and the world of Stormlight Archive in case you were interested. But so we are mostly following Kaladin in the story, and Kaladin, at the beginning all we know is that we've seen him on a massive battlefield fighting, having a unit assigned to him, and the next thing we know, we see him being enslaved, having a brand on his head, and trying to basically survive. And he's very much in a depressed state of mind because he's been trying to escape, he's been trying to save people, but he feels like everybody who he tries to save, everybody who gets in contact with him dies, and he always survives. And then we follow kind of Kaladin's journey throughout as he's dealing with these sort of like depressed moods. He also refers to it a lot, that he has had his moods ever since he was a teenager, that he's mostly had them when it's been when the weather has been gloomy and things like that. So it's very much dealing with mental health as well, especially in the character of Kaladin. So, the two other main characters that we're following are Dalinar and Shallan. So Shallan is a young lady from a smaller house in like one of the farther regions of this world, who is setting out for the first time pretending to seek out an education in Carbran's, a major city nearby. She wants to become the ward of Jasna Kholin, but when she arrives there and meets with this lady, it turns out that Jasna is not looking for a ward, and she sends her away. But young Shallan is quite stubborn. She's very persistent, and so she will try to convince Jasna to take her on nonetheless. And then Dalinar. Dalinar is a high prince whose brother was killed like 7 years ago, I think, and they've been fighting a war against his killers ever since. But he is starting to doubt whether what they are doing is actually worth it, whether they shouldn't retire back to their country in order to stabilize their country again. So he's very much fighting with the tendencies of other high princes and his ideals. So he's very much he's reading The Way of Kings, and he's very much striving towards a bigger ideal, towards higher morals, higher standards. But he sees the behavior of the high princes around him, who are just like in it for the competition, in it to win glory, in it to win money, and he's having to deal a lot with this contrast and with his reputation being damaged because of this. And at the same time, he also finds himself in an awkward position because from time to time he has these sort of dreams that seem to be hyper realistic, and he's kind of unsure whether he's going mad or whether there's truth in these visions. If there's truth in these visions, then the future is not looking very bright. But so The Way of Kings is absolutely wonderful. I read it first 2 years ago, I think, and I'm already rereading it now. And since this is a 1,200 page book, that's saying a lot, but it's absolutely wonderful. You can fly through it if you want to. I think especially with The Way of Kings, at first it's quite difficult to get into because there's a whole lot of world building that you need to get used to. For me, upon this reread, this wasn't a problem at all, but it definitely, a lot of the people who were reading for the first time were having difficulties at the beginning. Also with constantly switching from one character to another. This can be enjoyable for some, but on the other hand, of course, a chapter usually ends in a way that you want to continue, especially if you get to a certain point in the book. What I also found, what I observed a lot when I reread it, is that there's a huge amount of foreshadowing in this for the later books, and that just makes me kind of curious for like how much foreshadowing will I see when I've read like 3 more books in this series. Will there be foreshadowing for the final one of those, for example, from the very get-go? And also, I hadn't noticed this quite as much in my first read of it, but there's quite a lot of time when we are not following Shallan. I remember like not being as invested in Shallan the first time around and thinking like, yeah, her storyline really isn't that, like it didn't interest me that much the first time around. And now I get it, because she's actually having the least screen time in this book. So most likely that is why I also didn't connect to her as much, because we aren't getting to see her a whole lot. And the second book is mainly focused on Shallan, so things change. My opinion of her shifts a lot when we get to the second book. Definitely read this one if you're into epic fantasy. If you've read previous works from Brandon Sanderson, go ahead, you will definitely love this one. It's got a lot of nice character interactions, a lot of humor in it as well. There's some mysterious characters in there as well. If you have never read Brandon Sanderson before, so he will have like a chapter header or something like that, which is like a quote for something or that, and that kind of, in the beginning it puzzles you, but you will start to uncover the meaning of these little fragments before chapters as you go along. But so yeah, that's my reading for the month of October. Overall, I'm extremely happy with it. So I read 2,700, like almost 2,800 pages in the month. Finished 5 books, which is also like above my average for month-wise this year. So I'm very happy with the way that the month of October went. I really enjoyed myself. I loved rereading The Way of Kings. So I'm not blaming myself for like kind of pushing that one into my TBR, even though it wasn't foreseen. And so I'm really looking forward to continuing with Words of Radiance in the month of November. But so yeah, see you guys next time. As I always say, I don't have a fixed filming schedule, therefore I don't have a fixed posting schedule. I film whenever, I post whenever. I'm sorry. See you guys.